Good morning. My name is Mark Wainwright. I'm a division head for neurology. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Ann Tilton as the 2025 Faye Sarkowsky Lecturer in Pediatric Neurology. I'll say a few words first about the impact of the Sarkowsky Foundation on the Division of Child Neurology here before I introduce Dr. Tilton. The foundation was established by Herman and Faye Sarkowsky in 1982, and it funds Jewish, arts, healthcare organizations across the region. Herman Sarkowsky was a real estate developer and at one time part owner of the Portland Trailblazers and Seattle Seahawks. The foundation involvement in the Division of Child Neurology began in the 1990s. It endows the chair, which I'm honored to hold, also endows a fund which helps support academic activities in the division, and since 1995 has endowed this lectureship. The lectureship is intended to invite people, physicians or scientists who've made substantial contributions to the field of child neurology, something which Dr. Tilton exemplifies. The speakers selected by members of the division and has included luminaries in the field continuously since 1995. Dr. Tilton is a native of Texas, trained at the University of Texas. Early in her career was a member of the faculty there, and then since 1985 has been a faculty member at Louisiana State Health Sciences University, where she's director of rehabilitation and the Comprehensive Spasticity Program and director of the Child Neurology Program. Her research actually began, the first paper was a basic science paper on drug toxicity in rat liver mitochondria, I think. But I know that raised Dr. Sonato's eyebrows a little, but her research has been clinical, and in the field of neuromuscular disorders, spasticity, cerebral palsy, to which she's made substantial contributions, her most recent paper being a consensus statement on the approach to the diagnosis of cerebral palsy. The breadth of her contributions to our field is substantial, and I'll summarize them briefly from an extensive CV. She is a former president of the Child Neurology Society and the Child Neurology Foundation. She was a recipient of the American Academy of Neurology Palatucci Fellowship for excellence in patient advocacy. She was named as the Mentor of the Year from the American Academy of Neurology Mentoring Program, a former vice president of the American Academy of Neurology. Her contributions, therefore, extend from a scholarship and mentoring and clinical leadership. And in recognition of that, I'll end here by saying she was recognized in 2012 with the Howard Award from the Child Neurology Society. That is given on behalf of our field to someone for outstanding leadership as a scholar, a clinician, and a mentor. So it's my honor and my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tilton. Thank you.
My goodness, thank you so very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you to the Sarkowsky family and to all those involved. I'm so happy to be like the 30th. Oh my goodness, that's absolutely amazing. Well, today, after you've heard what I do, when someone said, well, what do you want to talk about? I said, well, I'm not going to talk about cerebral palsy. I'll talk about something else because we have an opportunity to talk about it. And this originated quite a while back at the Howard, because I thought, well, what about the things that impact us? What about our life? And literally someone walked past me with a Voodoo t-shirt on. I'm from New Orleans, you have to know that too. And I went, that's it, let me figure this out. What about how that happens? So I have some questions for you. There'll be no right or wrong answers. That's why I always tell my patients, there's no right answers, it's neurology, it's okay. Anyway, so have you ever wondered how a patient could possibly get better before the medicines had a chance to have work? How about has one of those side effects before it's possible? Right? They already hate it. The other question is, why does medicine work better if they get it by prescription than if they buy it across the counter? Okay, we've got an emergency room person here. Just go take some ibuprofen. It never works. Okay, so, but if you write a script, it is going to work better. Okay? And you know, the other question is, have you ever wondered if stress could actually kill you? And I often say I'm at risk right here, talking and doing the things, right? So you've wondered, is that really possible? Well, today, that's what we're going to talk about, all of those things, and hopefully answer some of those questions. So disclosures, of course, none of this will apply to anything that should be in a disclosure. Okay, so we're going to talk about history and kind of wrap it in the cloak of mystery because of what we're talking about, but how these beliefs are going to impact our lives and the ones we touch. That's what's so important about the group we are. So the lens is going to be the neurology of voodoo, and it's going to teach us about our world, and what we thought was a very foreign world is really part of our world. Because it's a blur, this religion, social, biologic is a huge blur, and within that, we're going to talk about pain, we're going to talk about placebo and nocebo, maybe some, and placebo, by the way, if you haven't heard that one, sudden inevitable death, and possessions. How's that for the 8 o'clock in the morning? You ready? Okay, so we're going to start talking about voodoo so you'll understand this particular belief system. Now, could have I talked about the curanderos in Texas? Could have I talked about the traiteurs in New Orleans? Who traiteurs, by the way, one of the medical students' aunt was a traiteur, and their power doesn't cross the bayous, which makes sense because you have a lot of traiteurs and there could be a lot of problems. But at any rate, in this particular case, we're going to talk about the Western African beliefs. And that important parts about this is that fate is predetermined. But in Western culture, we also have tarot cards, we have people read palms, we do everything. But the difference is that the powers I'm going to talk about can alter fate, which gives you power. Okay, so you can counteract evil, and all one needs is a priest or a medicine man to do that. And therefore, you're not at the mercy of these evil spirits. So let's just talk a minute about the hierarchy of this. So the hierarchy is that there's a supreme being, a nebulous, sort of ethereal being that speaks through to deities or gods who are called loas. And these particular loas are like sun, wind, fire, all those. And then there are sub-loas and evil loas and good loas and such. And then the ancestors of the people are very important because they look over the moral character of everyone. And in addition, they may even have a seat at the table for dinner. And this blur between the unborn, the current, and the ancestor is sort of just this fluid flow. And then you have priests that you can turn to, and of course the social group of the people with their feet on the ground. So this becomes important in a minute. Now, the slave trade took place actually from the 1500s, but entering into our hemisphere and such, 1619 up until 1861. Somewhere between 3 and 25 million people were taken from West Africa. They were taken predominantly to South America, to the Caribbean for the plantations that were there. Excuse me, and in 1798, Haiti had an uprising. And at that point, a large number of people left Haiti and came into New Orleans. And so these were people from the Caribbean predominantly, and that's how that sort of influence really entered into that specific area, although people from all over would have this. So this new world was frightening. The new world was a problem. Within this system, however, if your godlike character, or Loa, is stronger than the next one, you can kind of adapt to them. So you aren't being, evil at all from doing that. So they accepted the new gods. And they accepted, like the serpent deity Da. St. Patrick worked well because he was the gatekeeper. Papa Lebda was entrances, St. Peter. Continue to use talisman, and you can see on the lower right is a talisman. So they wore necklaces and talisman, and they would draw these things, and this was their symbols. Now what's interesting is this integrated beautifully into Catholicism. So a lot of this is a blend of the Catholicism. And if you look at that a little bit more closely, this is the Pope's talisman. And pontiff means bridge. And he is the bridge to the higher powers. So it was a very similar system. And so even when it was really suppressed, it just entered into Catholicism and existed in that and then sort of moved around. So just to tell you a little more history that's interesting, Marie Laveau was a voodoo queen. And we now, by the way, have voodoo princesses and queens, and my son went to school with one of the voodoo princes. But you know, it's a spiritualism. It's not like evil, and it is all about good and not evil. But this woman became very, very powerful. She's the one who developed all the cards and the saints and the prayers and this, to the point of where people with large ships would come and ask for her blessing. She turned trials. She would go to the judge and change verdicts. She did all kinds of things in addition to becoming commercially very famous because they were scared of her. She was very, very powerful. She lived to 1881, but then it says 1915. They thought she was immortal because her daughter looked just like her, named her the same, so they thought she lived like 120 years. But when she died in 1881, the first death, not only was her death announced in the paper, the Times-Picayune in New Orleans, it was a half a page in the New York Times. Okay, so this is the sort of power that was going on. Meantime, the voodoo was suppressed, however, because of rules and laws after Louisiana Purchase. But it's still practiced, and here's one of the altars sort of things. And this picture of where people are dancing is that, have y'all heard of the Jazz Fest in New Orleans? This is Tent 5 into Jazz Fest. Okay, so it's really just sort of part of culture in a spiritual way. And looking at cultural knowledge, we have to recognize, and I'm sure with your Native American experiences here, you'll understand that there's a lot of cultural things that are going on that would be analogous to this. Here are talismans from other cultures. Here are other things where people utilize not only our science, but their beliefs. Okay, so here we go. Can the belief in voodoo really alleviate pain? So here's our first case. This is a 40-year-old woman who consults a priest for severe back pain. The priest invokes an incantation, help of a loa, now that you know what loas are, and applies a tingling salve. So what happens? It's gone the next day. So the question to us is, how can that happen? Why did the salve work? So we're going to talk about the mechanism of pain and the therapy and all of these things. So any medical treatment that we're giving has two aspects to it. One of which is the effect of the treatment, and the most important is the perception of that treatment, that the treatment is being administered, and that's what I'm going to prove to you. Okay, so we know that we have painful systems, and we have central and peripheral mechanisms. We know that we have an increase or decrease of pain based on perception. What we know as well is that we can give examples, and I will in just a minute, of how you can induce more pain than otherwise. Well, this is just going to hurt a little bit, you know. So what else do we know about that? Well, we're going to talk about the modulation of this. We can talk about the effectiveness of the ineffective, in which we can talk about placebo. When I was in medical school in Galveston, they could write orders for Obacap, and that's placebo spelling backwards. Okay, you think there's a little ethics here, but at any rate, but we're going to also find out that people can take placebos, and you can tell them it's a placebo, but you can tell one group it works, you can tell the other group, well, I don't know, here's just a sugar pill, but this one is known to help you, and that group will get better. Okay, so placebo means I shall please. From the Latin, actually from a Hebrew Bible, I shall please and walk in the face of the Lord, some other things about this. Nocebo, however, is I shall harm. And what this really brings up to us is that people with a sham drug can believe that it's going to be a problem, and 1 in 20 1 in 20 of people who get the placebo in any clinical trial have to get out because of adverse effects. Okay? So you can imagine what that does to your trial. Okay, so it calls attention to the sham drug, and it matters the changes in the brain, not necessarily the drug that you're given. So what's the history of placebos? I've mentioned that it came from the Bible, but historically in the Middle Ages, excuse me, when people died, they would have mourners go and wail and weep. By the way, it still happens, that people will come and go from funeral to funeral or whatever and, you know, be sad in the back. Well, these people would come and wail and be sad, and so they were hired to be mourners. But it was false sadness, and they were known as placebos. Okay, so it wasn't real. And the first, by the way, the first double-blind placebo-controlled study was done in 1784. Okay. At that point, there was a man named Mesmer, Franz Anton Mesmer, who had developed a healing process, and Marie Antoinette was very much engaged in it. He had decided that there were fluid channels that were invisible in humans. He called it animal magnetism, and that he had certain rods that he could change the channels of the fluids, and that would heal multiple diseases. Well, Marie Antoinette was very much into this, and a lot of people were into this, and he was going around curing people and doing things. Well, Louis XVI was like, I have none of this. This makes no sense at all. So he calls 2 people that he knew, and actually a third, to come as a commission and check out if this guy was real, one of whom was Ben Franklin. Okay, brought over Ben Franklin, Joseph Guillotine, who later separated him from his head, and also a man named Lavoisier, okay? And they came and they did a trial where they had Mesmer and the Mesmer tools and did the whole thing, and guess what? They used, you know, sticks as opposed to the other and proved that it was not real. And they said that these people had been mesmerized. Okay? So that was a double-blind placebo-controlled study. So when people think it's new work, it's really been around a while. Okay. By the way, we'll hear about a lot more trials if you want to that really were going on in the 1800s and such. But classic conditioning, and here's Pavlov. And Pavlov, as we know, worked on the clinical setting and the effect. You ring a bell, this happens, or whatever happens. And so he also really recognized something called nocebo. And this is where someone gets an adverse event with an inert substance, an inert anything. Examples here, nausea when you walk in where you had chemo. Remember going to the doctor and going down the street, getting anxiety and feeling it. So just that mere thing will do it. From a placebo standpoint, there is a lot of proof, even with protocols such as this, where conditioning makes a big difference. Examples, we're going to give you a painful stimulus, but we're going to give this cream, and this cream will numb it. And then someone else says, well, here's just some cream. And who did better? Those who were told that it would work. Even though both of them were inert, both of them didn't matter. So the conditioned cream had less pain, without question. Oh, excuse me. There we are. So the subject has to believe that the healer or the treatment will improve them and that this will occur. Fascinating. Double-blind placebo controls now, the placebo effect can be up to 50%. In the triptan study, it was 20 to 40% of the patients got better with the triptan, but I'm going to prove to you in a minute why on that particular round. But people will get better. And if you've ever tried to do trials, I'm sure a lot of you have, all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, the placebo effect, this is killing me. How could it possibly be that? Well, it's going to be real. Okay, here's some other things that are very important for the emergency room and for anyone giving medicine. Things that influence are not only prescriptions, but the size of the pill. Okay, a bigger pill is better than a smaller pill. Color, number, and capsules are better. So it's better not to be a white pill. It's better to be a red, blue, green pill. and to take 3 of them instead of 1. Okay? And if it could be a capsule, even better. But better yet, the mode of administration. A shot is better than a pill. An IV is better than a shot. And the ultimate, of course, is surgery, right? Seen is better than hidden, and this is incredibly important because if they see it and they get the placebo effect, you can block it with naltrexone or naloxone. So it's an opioid effect if you can block it with naloxone, this placebo, okay? Now, as I mentioned, surgery is really the ultimate, and there was actually a double-blind study with surgery. If you can imagine, in 1959, it was in the New England Journal of Medicine. It had been done earlier because there was a procedure in which people with angina would get their mammary vessels clamped. And because the thought was it would add more blood to the heart and angina would go away. So they did a double-blind on people in which they did the surgery, and then they did some that they just took to surgery and opened their chest, not all the way, but just did surgical stuff and sewed it up. So who did better? Both. Both were the same because they thought it was going to make them better. Okay? So then they moved on. Okay. So other things that are important is the doctor-patient interaction. And that includes the expectation. So if you say, this is really going to make you better, it's a whole lot more improvement than saying, oh, well, I'm not sure what this will do for you. But think of what we do now. So the things that are helpful is the expectation, the time we spend with them. Are y'all spending a lot of time? No. We have to move, right? Time spent, the enthusiasm when you walk in the room. But it's even better if you wear a white coat, if you have a stethoscope, and the ultimate's the emergency room. Yeah. So give them, if you're going to give them something, write a prescription, make it colorful, large, many if possible. Spend a little bit of time, wear a coat, stethoscope, and, anyway. So things that we really don't think about doing anymore. Okay. So why does this work? What is the issue of this? Well, I'm going to really kind of give you the substrate of placebo. What we do know is that it is based on endorphins. That is the same path, and it's going to be the same view as you see with opiates. And if you did a spinal tap on these people that had a large placebo effect, they'd have twice the endorphins in their spinal fluid. So it's proven. Now, what's interesting is that if you have a placebo effect, as you can see this picture here, it can actually slow the heart. It decreases cortisol. It, in fact, increases growth hormone. And, of course, the endorphins. But there's something called CCK you see on your left, cholecystokinin. And this cholecystokinin inhibits the placebo effect. And that's where nocebo comes from. So if you anticipate and you have a negative feeling going in, it's going to block that placebo endorphins. So they did some studies with a medicine called pergolide and went in and blocked CCK. And the placebo effect went up. So they thought that, oh, goodness, it's a painkiller. It does endorphin. Well, it turns out it's just blocking the CCK, and that it just increased the placebo effect. And it actually wasn't that at all. So it also works on the 5-HT system, which is the serotonin system in what sumatriptan and all those headache medicines work on. So now we're giving a medicine, comparing it to something that does it already, and you can imagine that there's not much separation when you're doing a double-blind placebo-controlled against something that affects in the same way the placebo does. So that gets to be a fundamental problem. Other things that are shown here, PET scans, the overlap of opioids and placebo lighting up on PET scan. So there's a lot of interesting things where the analgesia is largely overlapped. Rostral anterior cingulate cortex, orbital frontal cortex, periaqueductal gray, all of these are lighting up just as if you'd gotten an opiate. Some other fascinating work in Parkinson's disease. So they had patients that they gave sham medication to, IV, and they said, this is going to be DOPA, and it's going to make you move better. Well, the subjective was, and those who believed it, that the arm moved better, and those that said, oh, why didn't I get it, they didn't change. But they could move better, maybe based on dopamine. The other thing is that they did a very, very deep, as you can see here, sensor looking at firing of individual neurons. And what happened was the neurons are firing in this substantia area, but if they believed that they were getting the medicine, it slowed down. So they could see it on firing rates, they could see it on PET scans, they can see it with actual testing on instruments. The other thing was, in the fetal transplant, if you've heard about the fetal transplant study where they gave fetal transplants for Parkinson's, well, what really happened was that the quality of life improved, not in those that got them, whether they did or didn't, it was those that thought they got them. And if they thought they got the cells when it was a placebo, they did better. Okay. Psychological factors, if strong emotion can blunt pain, lifting cars, other things like that. Soldiers, accidents, different things. Sociocultural, we know that people can be in other circumstances where they can lift and really walk out of terrible situations on a broken leg and not realize it, that sort of thing. So from that standpoint, Voodoo can remove pain, sociocultural, and interesting, it can be blocked with naloxone, so it can block it as an opiate. Additionally, the fear of pain may be worse than pain itself. And that was a headline in the New York Times, by the way. Okay, CCK activated, but you already knew that now. So nocebo, the placebo is activated by the endorphin system. The nocebo is mediated by anxiety and activation of the CCK system, and that's when a negative effect arises from a negative expectation. So clinical trials. What we know is if we looked at comparing medicines, for instance, in the headaches, I mentioned it before, and in just pain trials, if you looked at ketorolac and meperidine and placebo, they were all equal. But if they did the first two medicines, ketorolac and meperidine, together, they'd say they're both effective. But what if they had taken ketorolac and did it against placebo and it was equal? What would have they said? It didn't work. So these trials and this information we have is totally influenced by the factors that I'm telling you right here. So it was just lucky that they did the two the first time, the first way. Now, open and hidden protocols I think are fascinating. What we know is that if you have someone who is in pain, that if you go in and you give them IV medicine, so they may or may not know you did it, because say it's the middle of the night, and you walk in and they're supposed to be on a pain medicine, maybe the ketorolac, okay? If you go in and you give them the medicine and they don't know that you gave it to them, it's equal to 6 to 8 milligrams of morphine. So if you wake them up and you say, here, I'm giving you your pain medicine, they will have a better effect because they are aware of it than if they don't. So if you're giving someone a pain medicine, even in, like I said, in the middle of the night, you're better off telling them they're getting it. Because if you did it hidden, it would take 12 milligrams. In other words, walked in, just did it. Before they would feel the same pain, it took 12 milligrams in the trial of morphine to equal waking them up and telling them you gave them the medicine. So now you could do a clinical trial. You could get the placebo out because you could walk in and say, whatever this medicine is supposed to do, I'll just give it without them knowing it. Now they don't have the placebo effect. Are they better or are they not? And that was one of the things they felt might be actually a way to walk around some of this placebo effect. You have a horrible migraine, you give them DHE, they don't know it, their headache goes away, that sort of thing, as opposed to having it naturally occur. So the large difference between the open and the hidden will help you with that effect. Now, here's some interesting things. So if you have migraine, symptomatic migraine, we're going to look at what the trial nocebo effect is. This, again, is the inert medicine has given them a bad outcome. Something happened, adverse event. And how many dropped out for it? Okay, so migraine, 18% had a bad effect, even with an inert medicine, and 0.3 dropped out. What about migraine prevention? 43% had bad experience. 5 dropped out. 61% with a sham medicine. Multiple sclerosis, 74% of the people had a bad effect, adverse event. Parkinson's, 65, neuropathic pain, 52, and depression, 57. So this is a major player in dealing with these disorders, all these disorders. Okay, so do we do nocebo in our practice? Probably. So we do an informed consent, and we tell them 1,000 things, right? And we say it could do this, it could that, it could give you a headache, it could, you know, in this case of a spinal tap. I haven't ever seen anyone get paralyzed, but, you know, they might. And, you know, it's never been reported. But at any rate, you have to do all of these things, and you have to tell them. And then we say, okay, this is going to be a little bee sting. It's been shown in studies of that, if you say, that I'm giving you a medicine that is going to let this bee numb and make you feel better when we do the procedure, as opposed to the bee sting, who do you think did better? No question. And that was in mothers getting ready to deliver babies and that sort of thing. It was a study. So also if they trust who's coming in, also if they're positive about the benefit, it is going to help. If you do a trial and you say, and this is in the chemo literature, we have a 20% chance of this medicine helping. Or we have an 80% chance this medicine will not help. By far and away, those who sign are taking it and doing the medicine. The 80%, well, I'm not going to take that risk. The 20%, well, it's well worth it. And we're going to come across this as the framing effect of how we deal with our patients and how we deal with each other. So positive about the benefit. And other things that we do know in terms of the nocebo, learned events, smells, white coats. Oh, I try to take my white coat off when I go see a little baby because they're like, you know, through the roof. They've already associated that. They already know that that's a possibility. Babies of diabetic mothers would cry when they were getting their glucoses checked. Newborns, if someone would walk in the room, they'd start screaming because they were getting their blood checked all the time. So they got the negative effect. What about our leaflets and media? It's amazing, though. It somehow doesn't influence people. When someone speaks, they must record it and then turn it up. And you might have, and you know, you're grow another head, your ears will fall off, you know, whatever. I mean, just 1,000 things that could happen with this particular medicine. But media, we've gotten immune to that. I think leaflets make people more nervous. So back to our patient. Why did this work? Was it the natural remission? She just that night was going to get better from her severe chronic back pain? Was it an effective treatment? That's totally possible. Was it peripheral stimuli because it was tingling? Were the expectations that she was going to get better? Was the placebo a great big pill? Okay. So, tuck that one away. So now let's change for a moment, and we're going to talk about sudden and inevitable death. This is the stress stuff and all of that. Well, in the case of this particular system, usually high impact, high stimulation, ceremonies, the sorcerer points, the person goes down, and they fall over dead. This particular person, as best I can tell, did not die. Cannon, a man named Cannon, went and started exploring this in the 1940s. And he has, and I've got the articles with me actually, if anybody wants them, multiple examples of people feeling that they had been cursed and dying, and that's what we're talking about. Well, can it happen? This is one of the cases that is fairly new. A 23-year-old presents on her birthday to the emergency room because she was going to die. She said her sisters had been cursed along with her, and they died at 21 and 22. And that was exactly what the curse had stated. Well, she was admitted for observation at her insistence, And so she was found dead the next morning. Okay? So how can this sort of thing happen? I'm going to ask you all in the audience if you come across, when we get through talking about part of this. What's the application to our world? The patient says, I'm going to die. I remember as a medical student, I had a patient who had an esophageal cancer accidentally, and the post-op pulled out the tube, the NG tube. It was a disaster. He was in the hospital for months and months. And he was one of the first patients I ever had. I'd go by and bring magazines, say, how are you doing? His family would come by. And one day I went there when he was doing better, and he goes, I'm done. I'm through. I'm, what are you talking about? You've been here 3 months. You're going to get out. No, I'm done. That's it. Finished. Done. He was gone 3 days. And I had another patient, same sort of experience, where she said, I'm going to, tomorrow I'll die. I mean, she did. And these were just, these weren't people that were necessarily related to the voodoo. But I suspect y'all can think about it. What do? The patient says it, operating room, maybe someone heard, there's nothing we can do for you, poor guy. There's nothing, we just closed you up, okay? On Omaha Beach, which you're looking at here, and I don't know if y'all have any of y'all been to Normandy? If you look at this beach, these people were in low tide, and it was from here, I swear, to the hall outside there that they were running across. And that's why they didn't think they were coming then. There were people who died on the beach that had no wounds. Maybe a little thing, okay? And there are assaults with death with only minor injuries. So what is this? Well, what we know is that Cannon, as I mentioned, in the 40s, found cases that this is a real phenomenon. And what was common in all of these was the absolute belief that an external force might cause your demise, and you have no power over it. So hopelessness and overwhelming, that's the common denominator. And if we look at this a little bit closer, and we look at it in terms of neurologic disease and neurovisceral disease, EKGs occur when someone has a stroke, coma, aneurysms. These are consistent with ischemia. What's interesting is there's no ischemia. And with brain death, it reverses. So there must be some connection between the brain and the heart, some direct nerves that are having an influence on this. Is it rare? Well, there was 100 stroke patients, and so think for a second, what do you think the percentage was that might have had this event? Well, in this particular group, who may have had some ischemic heart disease, it was 90%. Looks like an MI, okay? So what's going on in this? Well, this is some recent work that's been done over time, and what there is, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail on it, is that there are ultrastructural changes in almost every cell of the heart under these circumstances, and that the change is less as you get farther away from the nerve. So as the nerve to the heart increases it, you get farther away, it decreases it from the intracardiac nerves. It looks like an MI on EKG in a lot of ways, but the heart's very different. It's visible within minutes, not like an ischemic sort of thing, and predominantly subendocardial. I'm not a cardiologist. But the same phenomenon has been described in the vet literature for years and years and years. It's capture myopathy, transfer myopathy. Has anyone heard of this sort of thing? If a horse has got a broken leg, they just say, I can't save it. Not because they can't fix the bone, it's because the horse will die. Some people nodding yes. And part of it's death from restraint, hopelessness, autonomic hyperactivity. If I were the zebra, I would prefer to be gone before any of this is happening, right? And so there's some debate about that, but it's clear that this sort of capture, hopelessness, no power affects a lot of groups. Okay. So this is evidence of direct neural connection to the heart. So what about stress? can I produce the same lesions just with stress? 15 victims of physical assault, and without internal injuries, 11 of them had this. Takasobo, are y'all familiar with Takasobo? I really kind of got into this after really reading about this. So Takasobo is the octopus trapping pot. And the reason is because the heart at the base really expands and looks like this particular pot. So it's left ventricular dysfunction, predominantly in women, predominantly after severe emotional stress. Those examples are things like natural disasters, earthquakes. We talked about Katrina, and there were people whose families, husband and wife died, that sort of thing, and all of that. Now, I was like, how often does this occur? And in digging this, my husband's a cardiologist, I said, well, how often do you see it? And he goes, oh, I don't know, not that often. And he's with a private practice, he goes, oh, probably 12 or 15 a year. Turns out it's about at least 5% of all people are admitted for suspected MI. And the problem is, and it's reversible in theory, but it can rupture, it can get arrhythmias, 6 times the risk of arrhythmias. So it's something that's out there based on the sort of things we're talking about. And they're working to figure out, in fact, I just reviewed a proposal where they're looking at this to try to figure out prevention and figure out why, because of the frequency that it occurs. Okay, we see it in acute neurological, we see it in acute psychiatric emergencies, and the thought is it has a role in death. SUDEP, potentially up to 17% for epileptologists. Drug abuse, war, grief, asthma, all of these things, so in our lives. Now, what about just very quickly inevitable death? And I hate to end on these sad notes. We'll get some good ones here in a minute. But anyway, previously well woman, severe abdominal pain, surgery, can't find anything wrong with her. She becomes isolated, more weak, went outside of the city and just sort of lived, but this is in a small cultural sort of thing, went and finally died, but they wouldn't bury her in their graveyard. And that was because they thought she had been cursed. Anyway, so a little bit about folk medicine. 2 forms. This could be many cultures, natural and the unnatural from hexes. And the voodoo dolls, which I have one with me here, they're extensions of people. So if people are very careful about hair and other things, because you can take it and put it on the doll and that becomes the person, and then you can have the pins or whatever else you would like to take care of that person. So that's the idea of the voodoo doll, and I'm going to dig in my bag here in a second. Anyway, so you think, oh, well, that's sort of odd for voodoo. Well, the truth is, multiple cultures have done this. Cursed. You are banished from the church. You are banished from our group. You are banished from this. They withdraw. The family withdraws. And the person, fatigued, stop eating, and they're cursed. They're done. So we have a question, and that is it possible that we can do the same to others? So we are the power. We're medical. The patient believes in the doctor or someone that they're working with from a medical profession. The patient has no control, and we say, we don't have anything else we can offer. And so we withdraw. And how many times have people been on rounds and say, well, I don't want to disturb them because, they're not doing well and I don't want to disturb them. And in fact, that may be withdrawing and causing more problems. The family then withdraws, sort of in their grief. And it's been proven that you could see where someone may have thought that they had, in this particular case, it was abdominal cancer. At the end, there was none. But the thought was it was there, and they just withdrew. So our lesson is that we need to be there for people. In voodoo, you're hexed, slowly withdraw, the family withdraws. And traditional things, maybe loss of the will to live, team withdraws. People, there's all these reports of people who go ahead and stay alive until their birthday, until a special occasion, and then they go, that sort of thing. But after natural disasters, the same sort of thing. So very quickly about possessions, it's to be seized by spirits. Well, it so happens that in Greece, it was divine, it was visitation. The Christians, it was demonic. In Voodoo, it's being possessed by one of those Loas. So it could be good, excuse me, stepping back and forth. And a divine favor. That's okay. In Haiti, it's interesting, if you have been possessed and you have mental illness, your spouse cannot divorce you because they feel that it's a possession in the divine favor sort of way, and that is something, it's not to be shamed, it is something to really be helped. So a 24-year-old's convulsing after being up all night at the uncle's funeral, thought that they had been possessed by the Loa of the uncle, and 6 years of treatment by the priest with not a great deal of success. 27-year-old, during a ceremony, falls in, one of the Loas, that Marinette, who has to do with fire, so they thought that was, in fact, a curse. So that sort of thing is the type of possession. But now we have to turn around and say, well, why was that priest not successful over those 6 years for these things? Well, same sort of thing. If our medicines don't work, they clearly weren't following instructions, right? They were non-compliant, or it would have worked. Or they didn't believe, or it was a pseudo event anyway. It was just a fake, because it couldn't be what we were doing that wasn't right. Maybe it was too strong in this case of a Loa, and they couldn't override it. Or maybe alas, not a possession, but it was actually epilepsy, which it was in these cases. And so what really goes on is people will choose both. They will go and get help from the system that they understand, and they will go and they will get help from traditional. So it's very important to find out what else may be going on. And we've had, I've had people who are, well, if nothing else, all the homeopathic medicines that people are taking. Because they have someone telling them that if they take, wing of bat, whatever, it may really be helpful. And in some cases it really is, but it may not be for the reasons that they think it is, right? Because they believe it'll work. So you have to kind of take that into consideration. So today we've talked about possessions. We've talked about nocebo and placebo. We've talked about pain and sudden death. And we've talked about withdrawal. So the question is, belief systems hope to give us control over things that we feel are uncontrollable. And we need to look more closely as what we think is odd and other, because A, we're also part of that and doing it in our own way. And very important, we need to be aware of the values, and above all, do what we can for the family and the patient to maintain the dignity that this is something they believe in. And it'll help them. So I love this quote. It's from one of my favorite scholars. The problem is not with what you see, the problem is with what you recognize. It's from Sherlock Holmes. Okay. And with that, I have a thank you and a form I have to show you. But what's in this little bag that Emily, I think, is going to come in with, I brought voodoo spells. So these are little, they're not bad. They're all good, and it's a belief system. It is not scary. After I did all of this work, I'm like, it's nothing, Of course, I haven't been cursed either, but to my knowledge, Anyway, but it's just little things if y'all want to see them. So I just thought y'all needed some spells. And with that, the grand round evaluation. Thank you.
The spells are going to be on your way out in the back of the room, but for now, I can open things up to a few minutes of questions.
My question, thank you so much. That was incredible. My question is, and I apologize, I was a few minutes late if you covered this, is Are there people that are found to be more or less susceptible to placebo? Because
Interesting.
I think it's me.
That was also my question, me and my husband. Yeah.
You know, I started looking at it, and the hypnosis literature talks a little bit about that too. But yes, turns out men somewhat more placebo. Women tend to be more nocebo. I wouldn't have said that. Also, people who, as you would imagine, people who have less effect are those who are super type A, those who have anxiety, those who have other things, you know. But it's there for all of us.
I'm wondering how this knowledge has changed your approach to treating patients.
Very much so. Very much so. I kind of did part of it anyway. This was a story. There was this patient that had cancer of brain, glioblastoma, little girl, terrible, terrible. The father actually threatened to kill the pediatrician because, you know, not having the knowledge that it wouldn't have made any difference anyway. And I went and saw her every day, even though it was really just social because the family was so distraught. 20 years later, I got a note from the father telling me how much he appreciated it, which I was like blown away. It was on my birthday. It was the strangest thing. But at any rate, yes, it has, much more than just that. I mean, I recognize definitely the placebo effect. And when I'm in a meeting and someone says something, oh, well, that's just placebo, I'm like, you know, let's talk about it, you know, because it really does influence what you see in clinical trials and what you expect with things happening, and how we can't give them the time, unfortunately, but how you understand more of the logic of what really people need or want. I don't wear my stethoscope well, it's in my bag most of the time, but I don't wear it all the time.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. Question, it's easy to understand how the placebo effect works with really subjectively reported symptoms like pain. You had that really intriguing data about the neuronal firing rates in Parkinson. I'm curious what you've noticed in your clinical experience with things like seizures, where you can quantify amounts of seizures per day, and placebo effect with medicines. Like, does the bigger pill of Keppra help?
Ah, that's interesting. No, well, there is literature in how it makes it hard to do clinical trials in seizures, too, because I don't have it right at the tip of my fingers. But if people, again, it does influence if people think that it's going to work. It really does help. It does help that. Now, why? Are they sleeping better and therefore they aren't this? I mean, you can think of trying to establish logic to some of it. And why they do tolerate it better. But if they hate the pill, it doesn't go down, and that doesn't work at all, I can tell you. Oh, good.
This was so fun. I'm
Oh, good.
curious about, obviously, like the investment in the patient mirrors the doctors, but in terms of like for peds, what are your thoughts about like the effects of announcing to parents that meds are being administered when the kid may not understand?
I'm sorry, what was the part about him being administered?
Like we say, here's the pain med,
Oh,
and the kid's too young to understand that, but the parents are aware versus not aware.
ah,
What are your thoughts about, like, because everything we do filters through them?
uh-huh. Well, let me think about that for a second. The children, pretty young, recognize that they get a medicine to feel better. I mean, that would be one thing. And the parents' expectation and the anxiety related to that probably makes a difference too, you know. So I'm sure they, you know, at certain ages they're not real interested in the capsule, I can tell you, you know. But overall, I think the nurturing and all of that probably does make a difference.
Thank you. This is a lot of the acute care PT/OT staff.
Oh,
and we were
good.
wondering if you have any thoughts on how we can apply this to kids with F&D.
Aha. Well, it's the like the pseudo seizure and the F&D. Clearly, the positive. Clearly, this is going to get better, And in the case when we're doing F&D for the rehab unit, we just did a contract, and we've done all kinds of things now. It'd be fun to talk about. You may be doing it already. Yeah, because we now have to have the family say out loud it's F&D. We will do no more testing. No more testing. Well, she said she needs an MRI. That was my most recent one, and I'm like, no, so no more testing, anticipating that it's going to get better. Sometimes it's the ticket out. That's what we used to do with those. But sometimes it's resistant. They are, fairly resistant to it. But saying this technique will make this better is all you can do. Sometimes they'll escalate. Oh, now she's having seizures. That's usually what happens when, it's like, but yeah. So it is hard. F&Ds are hard altogether, but there is a contract I can share with you. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was wondering, I always tell, especially my headache or FND types of patients, we need to get your self-healing powers, and which is, I guess, the placebo. But how is there research on how to not leave that 20 to 40% on the table? How to formally build that into your treatment, to get that effect for free, essentially.
Oh,
and
well,
and what works best? Yeah. Stethoscope.
Yeah, really, all those sort of things. Make it blue, make your pill blue, It is hard. But if they're going to get something, they need to see it. They need to be involved in it. They need to, get the pill. But how to, I guess, to really tap into the placebo side, right? Is that what you're asking? Yeah.
What works best? What is the most effective? Because these are all short term, or the blue pill works better, but and even with the patient's participation, building that into your treatment.
I think, yeah, all of these things are helpful. I think people from the audience could speculate the things that you could extrapolate from here. The headache, what's interesting is if you can get 20 to 40% in the headache right off the bat from the person believing it will work, then it's going to make it better. The person who's migraine, yes. Yes, Berterball and riboflavin. Well, the riboflavin makes you tingle, so that does help. So that is an improvement. But again, it's just the fundamentals, I think.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. We are at the end of the hour, so we'll give you a big hand.
Thank you.
For everyone who's here, there's a little scroll for you on your way out, so make sure and get your Voodoo spell. And you've changed everything about how I practice, so thank you so much.
That's what I want. Thank you.